they were the first ones to lose their jobs and the last ones to be re-employed. And what happened was, during the communist period, Roma sought better paid jobs, and they migrated, or many of them migrated, to areas with heavy industry, which was prioritized by the command economy. But they migrated not as nomads and not even as Roma, but as poor people seeking better work opportunities. And others remained in rural areas working on state and collective farms. But with transition, they suffered endemic unemployment as these Rust Belt industries shut down and agriculture privatized. And through no fault of their own, many Romas became dependent on state benefits. And they were the first to be, as I say, the first to be sacked. Nevertheless, the most strongly held prejudice is that Roma are lazy parasites, unwilling to work and content to live in this way to the detriment of non-Roma. In particular, they're accused of having many children to maximize child benefits, and this is stated openly by the extreme right. But more worryingly, mainstream politicians and the media convey similar meanings in implicit but readily understandable forms, particularly at election times. So in the most recent Czech election, the current Czech Prime Minister talked of the damaging effects to the economy of welfare dependency. And nobody was in any doubt who he was talking about. In 2004, there was a savage cut to child benefits for larger families, and this was targeted entirely against the Roma, who demonstrated in 14 towns and took food from shops. A protester's banner proclaimed, "We want work, not beggars' handouts." The government response was to mobilise 2,000 police and soldiers to restore order with water cannon, cattle prods and truncheons. Much earlier, the present Slovak Prime Minister visited a maternity hospital in eastern Slovakia, suggesting that Slovaks could become a minority in their own country. During the 2002 election campaign, his party campaign included examining ways to end the irresponsible growth in the birth rate of the Romani population. A possible consequence of such rhetoric was that some medical staff took matters into their own hands and procured sterilizations for Roma women without their consent and without their knowledge. This was condemned by the European Court of Human Rights as inhuman, but others would characterize this as genocide. Particularly in the Czech Republic, but elsewhere as well, intercommunal tensions were exacerbated by removing Roma families, often illegally, from city centres. Formerly, Roma had been put into older, dilapidated properties, but this became potentially valuable real estate. And what happens is that local officials collaborate with property developers to throw out the evicted Roma and take them to peripheral areas suffering multiple deprivation with already large Roma populations. This raises tensions among non-Roma inhabitants, but also in Roma communities as well. But social housing is not a priority in a neoliberal economy. And rents for these substandard flats in these locations are extortionate, since unscrupulous owners know that Roma have no alternative. In fact, in North Bohemia, these awful flats, the rents are as high as it would be as if people were living in Prague. And Roma become victims of loan sharks. And for some living in what become ghettos, crime scene's the only viable option. But this doesn't refer just to Roma as well. But it strengthens the other widespread prejudice about Roma, that they are all criminals. Okay, what should institutions do to diminish fear in communities affected by violence? Well, they ought to uphold the law to protect victims of racism and take firm action against the perpetrators of racist crimes. Secondly, agreement should be brokered among political parties to avoid using Roma as political football at election time. This might sound a sort of pie-in-the-sky, hopeful optimism, but it did happen in Spain. The problems are for the first one, many people in positions of power, the government, judiciary and police, are very prejudiced. And secondly, portraying Roma as undeserving parasites at times of economic hardship wins votes. I don't think I've got time to tell you about one particular politician who won 73%.
You actually have 3 minutes.
Okay. The real solution to diminish fear and traumas in areas of multiple deprivation is to attack the fundamental causes by sustained programs of regional development. And European structural funds, if effectively utilised, could result in jobs for both non-Roma and Roma. And this would underpin socially inclusive initiatives, including provision of social housing. Finally, how can the academic community contribute and prevent these occurrences? Well, they could try and persuade local and national communities that coexistence is viable and in the common interest. The alternatives are expanding ghettos or worse. Secondly, they could collaborate with NGOs and international organisations in monitoring local, national and EC performance, European Commission performance in implementing national Roma integration strategies. But this means stepping out of the academic environment for a world of practical politics. Thirdly, they could expose overt and latent discrimination. We've already heard about education, so I won't go into that. But one thing is worth mentioning, that even if that research has shown that Roma are actually improving their educational attainments, but even if they have the same qualifications as non-Roma, they are much less likely to get a job, and even if they get a job, they're going to be paid less. So this is proved by research. This is due to combined effects of discrimination, both by employers and labour officers, and also that Roma work in the informal sector mainly. Challenging and disproving widespread misleading stereotypes is very important. I've already talked about lazy parasites. But one tragedy of the deregulated economy is that many Roma do what they did before. They work as labourers, doing very heavy work, but now they're unprotected by labour laws because they work for subcontractors which are unregulated, and so they're paid meagre daily wages, and they often don't have insurance. Finally, what can academics do? Well, they can encourage and support young Roma scholars, because the emergence of articulate young Roma on the public stage does more to challenge the popular images of gypsies than anything else. Right, thank you.
Thank you very much. I apologize for the need to be brief. I applaud you, Professor Guy, for packing a great deal of information and nuance into the remarks that you managed to squeeze into the time slot.
Okay, you missed the joke at the end, though. Sorry.
You can surface that later.
Okay.
So it is now my pleasure and honor to introduce Desi Girgay, who is the director of the European Roma Rights Center. He's a human rights lawyer by training. He has participated in many human rights policy and legal ventures, and he's played serious policy roles on behalf of the Roma. His main area of work has been within Romania, but then on the broader plane of the European Union more generally. And his reflections on the conditions of the Roma from this somewhat cautionary note of foreboding and what can be done about it is one that he's going to share with us now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well. Let me start, as my colleague saying, Romale. It's a bit burdensome talking on a celebration day about what I am supposed to talk, meaning violence against Roma. I think a celebration day should also include a moment of remembrance. Roma, first of all, were in some parts of Europe slaves in the 18th and 19th century. They were victims of the Holocaust. They were victims of mass deportations by communist regimes. They are also still victims of deportations in some countries. France was one nominated. But I think as well, because there was a question from the audience which was related to Roma themselves and to what we need to do about Roma. Yeah, you put the question. I think a celebration day should also include a moment of self-assessment. Self-assessment for Roma, and I think it's crucial. It is crucial because it means that we need to see where we are. We need to see where is our political participation, where is our civic participation, what changes we have to do as Roma, you know. And then there's one particular question which arises from my presentation about violence. So it's very interesting because at the level of the European Union now, it is officially, formally acknowledged that Roma are victims of discrimination and social exclusion, and the European Union firmly said this is not acceptable in Europe in the 21st century. While it is also very interesting to see that some member states in the European Union don't necessarily acknowledge that the problems which Roma are facing are discrimination related or rights related, but they rather acknowledge the fact that these are poverty-related, social exclusion only. Hungary is an example where Hungarian officials, they officially said the Roma issues are not rights-related issues. The Roma issues are poverty-related only. It is also very interesting to see that the statement of the European Union lacks or forgets or leaves aside something which also is very, very important, and that's anti-Gypsyism, anti-Romani sentiments, intimidation, harassment, and at the end of the day, violence against Roma. The EU doesn't speak at all about these issues in the framework strategy. In its communication to the European Parliament, there is nothing about that, even though the European Parliament was really much pushing for this, but it's missing. What is also very interesting is that the recent survey of the fundamental rights and UNDP shows, so we have data that Roma face discrimination in an everyday life. What is also very interesting that in a previous report of FRA from 2009, it shows that one out of 5 Roma, they face racially motivated violence. The big question mark is the following: between 65% and 100% of the victims, they do not report the crimes. That's a very interesting question. I think that needs some sort of self-assessment for Roma to see why is that happening, why almost 100% of the Roma victims are not complaining. And of course, there are several factors for that. If we look across Europe, which the European Roma Rights Center is doing, not only monitoring and researching, but also litigating on behalf of Roma, in 2012, we have seen several reports of violence, attacks against Roma settlements reported in France, in Italy, in Serbia. We had seen people being shot deadly by police or non-police actors in Romania, in Slovakia, in Czech Republic, attacks against Roma reported in Ukraine, in Bulgaria, so on and so forth. We have been compiling lists of violence cases or incidents against Roma in Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Bulgaria, and we looked for a period of 5 years, from 2008 to 2012, and we monitored more than 120 cases. What is interesting to see in these 120 cases, and let me just show you some figures. 61 attacks reported in Hungary in the period, January 2008 to September 2012, a total of 9 lives taken, including 2 minors, 12 Molotov cocktail cases, 16 cases shots were fired, 19 cases where Roma property was vandalized, 47 attacks in Czech Republic, 5 lives taken, 22 people injured, 10 cases fire bombs were used, in 2 cases shots were fired, 13 cases Romani property was vandalized, at least 11 cases Roma were beaten. 16 attacks in Slovakia, a total of 5 lives taken, 10 people including minors with injuries. In 6 cases shots were fired, at least 10 cases fire bombs were used. In 2 cases adult attacks of groups of minors, in 4 cases groups attacked Roma people. At least 2 cases Romani property was vandalized. 14 attacks in Bulgaria in September 2011 to July 2012. Total of 3 lives taken, 22 people, including a pregnant woman and 2 minors injured. At least 5 Romani individuals hospitalized after attacks. In at least 6 cases, Romani individuals were stabbed. In at least 17 cases, Roma were beaten, including 2 minors. Now, if we are looking on all these cases, what is interesting is that we have to look also on the broader context of these cases and where these occurrences of instances are coming up. What is...
Des, you've got about 3 minutes.
Okay, so the European institutions, and not the European Union institutions, but the Council of European Institutions, in 2012, the Committee of Ministers expressed their concern about stigmatizing rhetoric and about generalization about criminal behavior. This is something which has been taking place in Europe in the last 5 years. This is a shift in the dynamics of politics. The occurrence to stigmatizing rhetoric has been increasing, and this is not the new dynamic on this is that this is not now only related to extreme right movements and parties. Now it got into the mainstream political parties, mainstream politicians who are focusing their rhetoric in basically blaming the Roma for creating insecurity, blaming the Roma for being a threat to the public order, or criminalizing the entire Roma community, arguing the rise of the gypsy crime. And also this is taking place in the context of migration, where the politicians are very much using the migration issue as a way to heat up the discussions and basically to turn the discussions from some important things in the society to blame Roma, to stigmatize, and to basically generalize the view about Roma and the insecurity they create. What is also striking is that the common feature, if we speak about violence against Roma and how the state responds to violence against Roma, is that there's a clear lack of effective response. In 2012, the European Roma Rights Center has won a number of cases before the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. All the cases we won were about lack of ineffective investigation, lack of investigating racial motivated aspect of the case, and we won such cases against Hungary, against Slovakia, against Ukraine, against Russia. These were last year. So of course the question is what needs to be done. Now, first of all, states need to respond, and
Got
also
about
Roma
30
needs
seconds.
to respond, and I'm done.
This litany of numbers and then the patterns, which Desi gave us, is a very profound way of capturing the situation and the trends and what actually needs to be done. So thank you for summing up and for your very succinct presentation. We are now very honored to have a presentation by Kamen Mijay, who is the professor at Central European University in Budapest. He is trained in economics. He's held major positions in UNDP and the various European development structures. There's a large list of bureaucracies where he has been prominent, or committees where he has been chair or co-chair, and those are in the biographical statement, which I hope you will read, because it's a complex set of institutional categories that the United States is not very versed in. So call it to your attention. He's currently the chair of Making the Most of European Union Funds for the Roma, which is a big program of the Open Society Foundations, and he is co-chair of the OSF Roma Policy Panel. And he will be speaking to us of his very strong interest in promoting integration and inclusion for the Roma and other stigmatized and poor minorities in the context of the escalating violence that we've been talking about.
Jennifer, thank you very much, and good evening to all. You spoke about trends. I also see a worrying trend, which is a trend of declining allocation of time. So I'm going to try to do my best to deliver my messages to all of you. I am not a violence expert, so I will speak freely to important subjects of this fantastic conference, and given the declining allocation of time, I will not praise as much the conference as it really deserves. It's a fantastic cast of very experienced people, and really head down to Magda and to you, Jennifer, and the Center for European Studies. Even though I will not speak to the to violence too much, Jennifer, your introduction triggers me a couple of points. You spoke about ethnic cleansing, and as a professor, I am teaching from one of the most relevant books on this subject with the title Ethnic Cleansing of Man. And that has one important thing that I would like here to emphasize, and that is that it is not established dictatorships that are the most vulnerable to ethnic cleansing, but many other things, failed states and fragile new democracies. And it is, I think, really extremely relevant to our subject, because if we go to the trends that Desi started to outline, and if he had more time, I would have outlined more, it really is very worrying in our region. It's sterilization of Roma women, it's school segregation, these special schools that were amply mentioned in the previous panels, but it's also walls, physical segregation. It's also guards. In my country, so-called National Guard surrounding Roma settlements, and we can go on. We don't have time to go on, but it really points to an increasing desire and trend of the societies to segregate Roma, and this is where the new democracies elements come in. It's not just prejudiced politicians. It's somebody said in the panels. It's very prejudiced societies that do, yes, act irrationally from their long-term, from perspective of their long-term interests, but it is a fact of our life that it's happening this way. Given this, Jack Greenberg mentioned in the first panel. He said that if there was to be any change, it will be demanded by the Roma themselves. And it is true, but given the urgency of the issue, and given the situation in the majorities and this fragile period of the early democracies, George Soros thought about 6-7 years ago that he really would like to trigger some action directed towards governments and local governments, and hence my program, which I have no time to speak about. But I just want to say that we find it very important to work with the governments as well, and really try to convince them. I mean, there are many ways to work with governments, but the point here is to try to convince them, and also to work with local governments, to work with those that, in spite of all these trends, are doing good things, be it Kavarna in Bulgaria, be it any other. So we have also established a network of local governments with the acronym MARY that is trying to really bring together the coalition of the willing and try to create a positive momentum around the issue. Nevertheless, it is true, Professor Grimberg, what you are saying, and hence what Desiderio is saying is so right, that we also need to look what is happening in the Roma communities, because without their demand for dignity, things will happen with much less likelihood than otherwise it would happen. Marian Mandake, also in the first session, he listed a few questions, and I would like to continue where he finished. He finished with the questions, but really we need to have answers. And I think when we work with the authorities, the answer is that we have to work with all of them. the European Union, in spite of its bureaucracy, in spite of its overregulation, and in spite of what Amartya Sen said, which I think was rather irrelevant for the subject, because money is there in spite of all the issues. Money is there to spend, European money, but we do need to convince the Commission, and we are working with the Commission to establish regulatory frameworks that pushes the money towards the Roma issues. And by the way, there is this dilemma of Roma versus poverty. Again, no time. In the world of declining.
You actually have 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So
Everybody gets nervous
I
at
thought you
7
said-
minutes, apparently.
So there is a very intricate relationship between working on poverty and on Roma. We have to do both, and there are some positive examples of how to do it, and there are plenty of examples that have failed. We need to work with the national governments. Marian mentioned, and many others from Romania. Romania has spent in the 6 years of its 7 years EU cycle about 10% of its money that has been designated. So about 3 billion euros or more is still on the table. Some of it they will have to give back because there's a time rule also how they spend. But I just want to illustrate that there is a huge amount of money left on the table where is poverty of Roma particularly, because Roma poverty even in Romania and relatively poor country is much bigger than for the rest of the people. Perhaps I spoke about the local governments, only to add that in the case of local governments, again, one of the major issues is that mayors who want to be re-elected are sometimes so cowardly. But you can approach it in different ways. The mayor of Kavarna is not Roma, but he does do good things for the Roma, and he does get re-elected. On the other extreme, you have the mayor of Baia Mare, who 1 month before, we were talking to him how to remedy his extremely bad situation. That's the place it's one of the places with walls around the Roma settlement. We talked to him that he can remedy the situation, and he would